So this is part A of the Khudila television channel being broadcast from London in the UK within quotation marks at the time being the broadcasting time stated on the banner as 23:10 hours GMT, which is 10 past 11, the local time, British Standard Time, so called. And the latest development or the latest admission, as carried by Fleet Street about Boris Johnson's cabal is that in addition to the ones that have been already admitted, Boris Johnson and his wife Kerry Simmons attended a rule-breaking kind of party in number 10 Downing Street, where 100 staff from Downing Street. Now, that gives you an idea about the size of Downing Street. When it is mentioned as number 10 Downing Street, the first idea, the most persistent kind of impression, is there is a small building. It's not. Behind the front door marking number 10 is a complex of buildings that houses dozens of offices and hundreds of people. And it's a huge operation. And the fact that there is a new admission about 100 staff from Downing Street being invited suggests that there are others, that is, in addition to those 100, there are others in the kind of scandal. And it is coming out every day, one way or the other. And the other thing that we have noticed is that Catherine, not Catherine, Catherine, the spelling is Kathryn, Catherine Stone, the woman that actually recommended or had recommended Owen Paterson to be suspended from the House of Commons for 30 days as kind of his punishment for lobbying corruption. That made her kind of essential kind of point of reference. Catherine Stone. And such was the strength of the controversy around her recommendation being kind of hijacked by Boris Johnson, who overturned it. And as he hijacked and overturned Catherine Stone's recommendation against Owen Paterson, all those conservatives, not any other party, not Labour Party so-called, because although Starmer has politically murdered the Labour Party politically, there continues to remain a bench called, or benches called Labour. So when we are using members of Parliament, Labour Party members of parliament, we are referring to that formal kind of name. To us, in all intents and purposes, in relation to the behavior and the policy, Keir Starmer is politically has murdered the Labour Party. And we shall come to the latest kind of consequence of that murder in this edition. So what we are doing is looking at the latest admission. Latest admission which is being now called Partygate. And these are some of the latest kind of images that we can show. Even the Murdoch scum ran a heading which says do, which said kind of ascribed to Boris Johnson, that is to say, made that statement as if it was the statement made by Boris Johnson. One is a attribute, that is a direct kind of claim that this particular statement or phrase has come from this particular person. But when it is ascribe, it is not attribute, but in context, that is what is being kind of claimed by the narrator or the reporter. So the scum said in an ascription to Johnson, do as I say, not as I do. Now, that is the word Christmas, not as I Christmas do. That Christmas, that word Christmas, was inserted there by the scum instead of the word bloody. Because that is the phrase, that is the normal phrase, as I bloody do. And there are lots and lots of kind of insulting statements ascribed to Boris Johnson based on the fact that he had attended parties or he allowed parties in Downing Street to take place while the rest of the country was being told to strictly follow the rule of 2% at most meeting allowed to meet. Most the number of the people that could meet under the rules, maximum was 2 people. Well, there he was either attending or allowing parties to take place with dozens, or in this case, today's latest kind of report, hundreds of people. So let's see who is saying this one. So the Daily Mail is saying on this one, new leaked Partygate email proves 100 Downing Street staffers were invited to party at number 10, attended by Boris and Kerry, while the general public could only meet one other person outdoors. Now, this is the piece that they're running in the mail kind of online, and it was first posted at 14:37 GMT, let's say, and updated only a few minutes ago, 22:44, that is just a quarter to 11, and 20 minutes or so before we came online. Now, it says new leaked Partygate email proves 100 Downing Street staffers were invited to party at number 10, while public could only meet one person outdoors. And Dominic Cummings says Boris was there. That's the big was, big letters. So Downing Street staff were invited to garden party at number 10 during the first lockdown, according to email. An invite from the Prime Minister's principal private secretary, Martin Reynolds, told staff to bring their own drinks. And then Johnson urged them to attend number 10 lavish grounds to make the most of the lovely weather on the 10th of May 2020. At the time, England was in the middle of the first lockdown. The Daily Mail online goes on to say, with such gatherings banned even outside. The Met Police said saying that again, the Metropolitan Police in London said they are in contact with the Cabinet Office over reports of the drinks party. Bombshell email piles further pressure on an under fire Boris Johnson as he battles a series of scandals. Now, what the Guardian is saying online, and the daily bribing Boris Johnson graph, I think, has said before the Guardian posted it, that Catherine Stone, the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, that means that she was appointed by Parliament in a vote to oversee the standard of standard. And it was her report recommending the 30-day suspension of Owen Paterson that sparked the first of a still continuing series of disclosures, leaks, revelations about how Boris Johnson was not fit for purpose and was following kind of sleazy agenda. Because when Boris Johnson kind of prevented the implementation of Catherine Stone's recommendation against Owen Paterson, Boris Johnson was actually doing the opposite of what Parliament had intended Catherine Stone to be doing, which is to investigate complaints, and then award particular kind of penalties against members of Parliament. And that those penalties that she would award against particular wrongdoing or rule breaking or sleazy, corrupt members of Parliament would be adhered to, would be respected. But Boris Johnson's behavior over the Catherine Stone disciplinary findings against Owen Paterson, who was not only breaking rules, that is a minor issue compared to the magnitude of his corruption, was found to be involved in multi-million pound corruption and lobbying and similar things. So when the Guardian follows the daily bribing Boris Johnson graph in unconditionally, without any qualification, running the story that Catherine Stone is not going to investigate Boris Johnson's wrongdoings. Various claims against Boris Johnson, especially in this context, the still unresolved series of allegations against Johnson about his lying and falsification over the source or sources of funding for the redecoration of the flat in number 10 Downing Street. Now, as the propaganda for Boris Johnson has been kind of circulated about very surprising kind of decision by Catherine Stone, surprising in our view, not to investigate the alleged wrongdoing by Boris Johnson about the source or sources of funding for the redecoration of the particular room in number 10 Downing Street. This is incredible because all the comments that were made about her being ignored and her recommendation being overturned by, in effect, Boris Johnson's behavior, or that Johnson was lying and Johnson was kind of stifling her. And this decision that Catherine Stone is not going to investigate Boris Johnson's funding, the Downing Street flat redecoration, refurbishment, proves that she has been got at. That is to say, sufficient pressure has been put on Catherine Stone for her to volunteer that she is not going to investigate this allegation about wrongdoing in the decoration of the Downing Street flat. One very strange reason she has cited, according to the Fleet Street papers or their outlets, online outlets today, is a statement to the effect that as the Electoral Commission has already investigated the same kind of allegations and others, she is not going to investigate that same alleged wrongdoing. Now, there is nothing in Catherine Stone's terms of reference or her terms of kind of employment, whatever, or appointment, that says that she would act in tandem, that is to say, she would act alongside other third parties doing the same investigations, and that she would act as a part of a bigger kind of network of bogus investigators, watchdogs, as they say. Last thing they are is watchdog, because they are not tough enough, which is what the watchdog word is supposed to mean. They're not tough enough, and they most certainly are not in kind of rigorous, let alone independent. So we have, the Khudilar campaign has posted more than one tweet based on that stated decision that she is not going to investigate Johnson over the flat decoration, that somebody has melted the stone. That is a rhetorical way of our using the pun. Catherine Stone is not going to do an investigation which shows that the stone, which is how she was portrayed, because she was portrayed over the Owen Paterson decision, initial decision, before it was overtaken by Boris Johnson, that she was a tough, independent person. So we are showing that she has melted. That is to say, she has been completely overturned and made into a very soft person, soft watchdog, soft Standards Commissioner. That is to say, she has been melted. And we are suggesting that pressure has been put on her, either directly or by psychological kind of manipulation, whereby she has lost her independent kind of independence, and she's kind of emotionally and mentally and psychologically made unsure about what she can investigate and what she can't. And by announcing the decision that she's not going to investigate Boris Johnson's flat renovation, she's showing that she has been compromised, that she is no longer the independent commissioner for standards, and that she has been got at, if not directly, but as I said, psychologically. So she come to more of that kind of episode of Catherine Stone being melted in due course. Here on the page 7 of the Times of Monday, the 10th of January 2022, is the continuation of the coverage about this decision by a local council, a corrupt local council, to settle his claims, Jeff Monk's claims against them, and settle according to the kind of reports I've seen before this one. I'm looking for the sum to appear before me. How much is the settlement? I have yet to find it. I'm reading. But somewhere in other places, it has been reported that he has settled, or the settlement of his claim, that is Jeffrey Monk's claim, is worth 14 million pounds. Now, this is the story on page 7 of the Times of Monday, the 10th of January 2022, and it says, "Far flies over 4 million award in Snooty Fox hygiene case. An ex-council chief furious at payout and claim of affair with woman at center of 1998 dispute," writes Billy Kenba. Now, this woman is Jennifer Lawrence, who was a solicitor and who was a friend of Roger Heath, and who set off 20-year-long harassment of Jeffrey Monk. And we shall cover that stage by stage, segment by segment, in textual terms in this edition in the next few minutes. This is Jeffrey Monk again. Well, he is now no longer Mr. Jeffrey Monk, because while he was fighting the attacks on him, set off by Jennifer Lawrence, by the local council and the courts as well, he also did a PhD degree, and he got a degree. So he's now to be known as Dr. Roger Monks, as one paper has said. Okay, this is there are several people involved. The Jennifer Lawrence is the woman. 20 years ago, she was having an affair with the chief executive, and that led to her relationship with the council's chief executive caused the same council to bring a rare food hygiene prosecution against him, that is Roger Monks. So, speaking to the Times yesterday, that is on Sunday, Heath insisted that he had never met Lawrence and had spoken to her for the first time when she contacted him on Saturday in response to press coverage. And he's saying that I have never met Miss Lawrence, let alone had sex with her. He said. The suggestion that they were having an affair and that motivated me in dealing with the case was complete nonsense, Heath said. Now, who is Heath? Let's go back to the identification of this Heath. Roger Heath, 74, who was chief executive of East Northamptonshire Council until the early 2000s. Now, that is what he is. He's 74 now, and he was the chief executive of the East Northamptonshire Council until the early 2000s. Also rejected claims that he was having an affair with Jennifer Lawrence, 76. So he's 74 now and she is 76. So they would have been kind of in the late 40s and 50s, early 50s at the time. So Lawrence went the Sooty Fox in May. So Lawrence went to, the two is missing in the sentence in the Times. So Lawrence went to the Snooty Fox, okay, in May 1998. And she ate chicken liver pate. During her visit, there was a dispute over whether she had been served the wrong bottle of white wine. She said she was somewhat surprised when Mr. Monks came to see us at our table, and he was defending the indefensible, and that he was as aggressive as he was, but didn't see it as a big issue. Monks said he threw the solicitor and her dining companion out of the pub. That the Snooty Fox was a pub which also sold meals. That's what it was. But Roger Monks had 3 establishments or 3 pubs or pub-like kind of eateries. Lawrence fell ill days after the meal and was diagnosed with a bacterial infection called, now this one is kind of a clinical name, so I have to be careful about pronouncing it correctly. Well, let's try this one. It is spelled as Campylobacteriosis. Campylobacteriosis. This led to the Snooty Fox being visited by health inspectors. After being convicted of hygiene breaches, so that was followed by prosecution of Roger Monks, which is not mentioned in there, but effectively that's what they're saying. After being convicted of hygiene breaches, Monks was unable to pay a fine and damages of more than £20,000 and was jailed for nearly 2 months. That happened in 2003. He suffered a heart attack while in prison and had to sell his home to pay legal fees. He also sold the 3 pubs he owned. So his business and his health and his life was destroyed. In legal filings, Monks claimed that Lawrence and Heath had been having an affair, and this led to the chief executive, that is Heath, deciding to bring a rare food hygiene prosecution against Roger Monks. Speaking to the Times yesterday, Heath insisted that he had never met Lawrence, and that he had never met Lawrence and had spoken to her for the first time when she contacted him on Saturday, which is the 8th of January, last 2 days ago, in response to press coverage. And the press coverage actually followed the publication by Private Lie of the dispute that Roger Monks was engaged in because of Jennifer Lawrence's complaints against him. So here, the quotation I'm reading again: I have never met Miss Lawrence, let alone had sex with her, he said. The suggestion that they were having an affair and that motivated me, that is Roger Heath, in dealing with the case was complete nonsense. So the former council boss who lives in Torquay in Devon and works as a consultant said he believed the council had been unduly influenced by this lie, that is lie by Roger Monks. Sorry, Jeffrey Monks, not Roger Monks. Jeffrey Monks. These are new names, essentially. So I'm having to correct myself on Jeffrey. And work as a consultant and said he believed the council, that is East Northamptonshire Council, where he was chief executive, this Heath, had been unduly influenced by this lie, that is he and Jennifer Lawrence had been going around for 20 years. In legal filings, the council said it neither admitted nor denied that Heath and Lawrence had a sexual relationship. Lawrence also denies the affair. She says she was absolutely horrified and is in the process of taking legal action over the outrageous claims. She said she was not involved with the decision to prosecute Monks in any way, shape, or form. Heath said he was shocked that Northamptonshire Council, the new unitary authority, this is the new name of the authority that has been created by merging more than one previous councils, had decided to hand over such an absolutely eye-watering sum. He said it had not spoken to him about the decision. The council took over responsibility for Monk's claim when it came into being last year. If I was a council taxpayer in Northamptonshire, I'd have an awful lot of questions to ask about this 4 million settlement, he said. Now, some outlets are calling 14 million, but we shall come to that if we can find the contrasting version in any other outlet. Why 4 million pounds when he was convicted and fined for the highest penalties that have ever been imposed for a breach of the Food Safety Act? I'm bemused, Heath said. I can only say that had it happened in my day as chief executive, there wouldn't have been any settlement of this level. Heath said the local authority had carried out its environmental health duties correctly and that he believed Monks had been treated very fairly. Monks' legal team has highlighted that the council brought only 5 food safety prosecutions out of 7,000 cases over a decade, and that 3 of these related to Mr. Monk's pubs. Now that is very significant indeed, isn't it? Out of 7,000 cases, only 4 prosecutions, and the 3 of them against the same person, Jeffrey Monks. Health, Heath acknowledged that it did not normally prosecute because it was time consuming and costly. It would instead ask people to improve conditions and attend a course on food safety. Quote, his breaches were blatant. The chief environmental health officer and I were both of the opinion that it should go to court. Monks's lawyers argued that the case was based on thin and contradictory evidence and questions why there were no photographs of allegedly moldy ham. The Snooty Fox convictions was overturned in 2015. Monks's legal team said the involvement of a council chief executive in a food hygiene case was unusual. Heath said he had overseen the Snooty Fox case because Monks was complaining to councillors. Monks faced a prosecution of another of his pubs, the Samuel Pepys, while Heath was chief executive. Heath said he wasn't too keen on appearing to be coming hard on Monks, but felt the evidence was compelling. Monks was convicted in relation to that case, but it was also later overturned on appeal. An investigation by Northamptonshire Police into whether any criminal offence were committed by the council officials in relation to Monk's case is yet to conclude. So that's an ongoing investigation by the Northamptonshire Police. Jason Smithers, leader of Northamptonshire Council, has described the prosecution of Monks as an abuse of process that should never have occurred. The case marks the first time a claimant has successfully recovered damages for abuse of process since 1861. So it's more than 150 years ago. In a statement, Monk's lawyer said he wished as far as possible to return to private life now that his reputation has been vindicated. There is also an active police investigation. So even if he wished to comment on the position taken by Mr. Heath and Miss Lawrence, which he does not, he is unable to do so. That is to say, Jeffrey Monks is not going to comment on Jennifer Lawrence or about the role played by the former chief executive Roger Heath. Now, this piece has been obviously based on the Private Eye article in the latest issue of Private Eye, which has been copied by other papers in effect. They have not done the investigation. The Private Eye investigation, which is what has prompted the other papers to report on this. Now we shall then go to the corruption. Remember, anyone watching this program knows that we call all the English local councils corrupt councils. And what we base that on is the persistent evidence of the absence of accountability in these councils. Not one single council has got any manifest, objective, reliable, worthwhile process in place of holding the council's employees to account. Now, What does it mean? It means that the decisions of the council, the day-to-day decisions of the council, are made by employees, staff. They are wrongly called civil servants because civil servants, that objectionable phrase, the misleading phrase is used mostly about the employees of UK central government departments. And in the case of the subcontinent, where the British Empire imposed these services, the employees of central government departments were called civil servants. They still are. Civil servants in Pakistan, in India, and in Bangladesh. And I took an exam, which was the version, which was the last kind of period of the United Pakistan. So had Pakistan continued, and had I been kind of declared as successful, I would have been called a CSP, a civil service of Pakistan. And the examination was conducted by the Civil Service Commission. So with the independence of Bangladesh and creation of Bangladesh, I mean, my exam was kind of put at jeopardy. So it wasn't kind of proceeded with. So I would have been a CSP who would be appointed, first appointment would be as a subdivisional officer, SDO, and then assistant deputy commissioner, and then deputy commissioner and divisional commissioner, and all those things. So the civil service in each of these three countries in the subcontinent is the kind of highest bureaucratic rank, and they are the ones who, the civil servants. In the case of Pakistan, it was the CSPs. In the case of India, is the Indian Administrative Service. When the subcontinent was jointly under the British colonial administration, it was called the ICS, Indian Civil Service. And that exam was taken by Subhash Bose, the ICS exam, and he did very well in that exam. And so therefore, these people in the council, like the Roger Heath, etc., who are in senior posts, and they are not held to account by the elected councillors. In the case of the civil service in the subcontinent, they hardly were held to account at all. It was a one-off telling off by the minister, who was the rank of the kind of overseeing rank for the highest ranking civil servants. Essentially, there was no democracy. There was no democratic audit of the behavior of the civil servants in the subcontinent. And they made the main decisions. Most of the major decisions were made by the civil servants on the authority of the state that is authorized or did authorize these civil servants to make the major decisions. So therefore, they had the highest kind of amount of power on the assumption that they were behaving on behalf of the state. One of my relations coming from my village area, and in our kind of family, there were all the civil servants and the other comparable post holders came from my family in that area. So one of the ones that I had to deal with 51 years ago, 52 years ago, 52 calendar years ago, let's say, in 1970, was the divisional commissioner. That was the year before Bangladesh became independent. So that was East Pakistan. So this divisional commissioner was my uncle, one of my uncles, not my mother's direct brother, but he was part of the extended family or the family by marriage and whatever. So he was the divisional commissioner of the Chittagong division, which included the then district of Silot, which is where I come from. Now, I was working on a national newspaper at that time, national meaning circulation wise, country wise, the Pakistani national newspaper. And I was the chief political reporter. And one evening, because you work the night shift, because you work in the evening when you get the paper to bed, in the evening for the following day's paper. So I was sitting on the kind of outside of the office, and I saw a man approach approach the building of the newspaper. And then I soon recognized him as being somebody from my village. He was also a relation. In relation, he was an uncle, and he was the nephew of my relational grandfather, Arman Ali Chaudhry, who was the teacher of Sanskrit at the Sylhet Government School. So, and was a friend of the anti-British colonial movement, Dr. Zakir Hussain, who later became a leading cabinet member of the Jawaharlal Nehru cabinet after the British left. Dr. Zakir Hussain. He was a very close friend of my relational grandfather, Arman Ali Chaudhry. And this person who appeared in Dhaka with a heavy bundle of papers was Zia Uddin Chaudhry, who was Arman Ali Chaudhry's direct nephew. He was the son of Arman Ali Chaudhry's biological elder brother. And the Ziauddin Chaudhry told me that he had been sent by the people in our village or village area to travel to Dhaka and to meet me. I said, why? And so he gave the short version of a very long ongoing story, because there had been a campaign from our area for a road link between the small town or the market town of Dhaka Dokkin with Biani Bazar. And it covers a few miles of the field and the hour that my great grandfather was offered by many people. Remember the last edition, in gratitude, and he said no, and he didn't accept them. So the villager said that in his capacity as the divisional commissioner of Chittagong, my uncle from another side of the relationship, he was not my mother's or my father's biological brother, but relationship wise, he was an uncle because he had the rank of an uncle similar to my biological uncles. So his name is and was Muinuddin Ahmad Khan, not Chaudhry, but Khan. And he was the divisional commissioner of Chittagong division. And the people in the village, our village where I come from, and where Arman Ali Chaudhry is from, where Ziauddin Chaudhry came from, had found out that the long battle for the road from Dhaka-Dakkin to Bianibazar was about to be ended by the then Pakistan government making the necessary funds available for the construction of the road between Dhaka-Dakkin and Bianibazar. And that the decision was going to be twisted by Mr. Khan, Moinuddin Ahmad Khan, because he favored another route, another alignment, if you like, that would go eventually go miles away from the original campaigned for alignment. And that he was going to do that in order to please or appease his own wife's father. And his own wife's father was from a village next to the market town of Dhaka-Dakkin called Nogor. And that Mr. Khan would destroy decades of campaign from the people of our area. And he would take the alignment away from Dhaka-Dakkin to Chandrapur to Bianibazar. Away from there to Dhaka-Dakkin to Asirganj, and further away from that alignment, that route that went from Dhaka-Dakkin to Chandrapur and Bianibazar. So that was the purpose for Ziauddin Chaudhry to be sent with all these papers and documents to meet me. Now, I was not an employee of the government, and I was only the political reporter or the reporter or journalist on a national newspaper, which had no decision-making powers whatsoever. So why did they send him to me? Well, that is because of the other things I had done. I'm not going to detail those now, but that is the reason, because I was known for campaigning action. So what I did was to tell Ziauddin Chaudhry to leave the papers with me and to return to Silot, return to Chandrapur, the village. So it was either the day after he visited me or the day, 2 days after he visited me. I cannot remember the actual sequence of the dates. But on a weekday, there was a full page, 8-column spread in that newspaper about that particular alignment, about the road scheme. And it named my uncle, Mr. Muinuddin Ahmad Khan, as the divisional commissioner who was sabotaging the years of campaign. Now, on the day of the publication, I was back in the office of the newspaper, and I received a call from Chittagong, where the divisional commissioner's office was based. And the phone call was from his wife, who was an aunt of mine. And she said, "So why are you trying to get your uncle sacked?" I said, explain to me how I'm doing that. And she said, well, this will completely destroy his career. I said, well, first of all, I have no intention of having him sacked. Secondly, this issue is not a new one-off thing. It has been going on since before I was born. And I think that the correct route and the alignment should be original alignment as the people have been campaigning for. I mean, she was kind of emotional in the phone call. I'm not going to reproduce all the emotions, but essentially, she had a point. She wanted me to know that this had affected his position in the government. Essentially, what happened as a result of that particular article that I had written and published, the scheme was reverted back to where it was originally kind of wanted. And now this road has been, of course, I mean, we're talking about 51, 52 years ago. The road has been built, and there is a kind of bridge over the river Kushiara that is near our house, and the Moinuddin Ahmad Khan route has been abandoned. Now, that was the kind of reporting that I did, and I did other reports for the Sylhet-based Jugoveri and its English language version Eastern Herald or Eastern Herald. Both of those were owned by the family of Aminur Rashid Chaudhry. Why am I saying all of this? Because the behavior of central government civil servants, decision making by civil servants, or their local council counterparts can only be influenced for the better or can only be exposed when they're doing wrongs if the local so-called papers or the locally kind of based journalists report what is actually happening. Now that was 6,000, 7,000 miles far from here, and that was 52 calendar years before. Now, what that shows universally is the role of journalists. If real journalists, I mean, the Financial Times says that it is published without fear of ever. Let's go to today's Financial Times on the editorial page, what it is boasting about. Yes. On page 22 of today's Financial Crimes, it says, without fear and without favor. It's a quotation, semi quotation, it's there. So that's supposed to be the motto of newspapers, Financial Times, and others. But to what extent do they practice that motto? And the answer is not to much extent, not to any really significant extent. And in the commentary about the corruption in Tower Hamlets Council that I broadcast yesterday, and in the context have been broadcasting before, the main point that can be made on the facts is this, that there are wide-ranging and widespread instances and incidents of claims and allegations against the Tower Hamlets Council while Lutfur Rahman was incumbent as the executive mayor. And these allegations were not just kind of individually made, personally made remarks in the population inter hamlets, but these are allegations that have been published both by the accountants firm, Price Waterhouse Cooper, whom the then community secretary, the cabinet secretary responsible, so called, for the local councils, Eric Pickles, he commissioned Price Waterhouse Cooper. And when he commissioned Price Waterhouse Cooper, he did that on the already widely published a series of claims against Lutfur Rahman's regime and his abuse of the resources of the council. Now, what I did 52 calendar years ago about the Chittagong Divisional Commissioner, and incidentally a relation of mine, Moinuddin Ahmad Khan, was to say more or less the same things, that he was abusing his power and he was trying to do the wrong things for personal reasons, family reasons, like his wife's father. He was appeasing his wife's father. And I said that is wrong, and it's an 8-column, almost full-page article. Now, one of the things I say is that I never worked anywhere, really. I never worked anywhere in any publication, any campaigning journalism, or I never did any journalism for money. If I had been a paid kind of journalist on that paper, I'd never be allowed to publish that, because the paper had a particular partisan kind of policy. So they would never, ever control me as to how much of the truth I'll say. I'll say the whole truth. I work for various newspapers, but I didn't get any money. I'm the only one probably in the whole subcontinent, in the whole world, who has done this for years and without any money. I wrote in English, I wrote in Bengali, and I wrote in Siloti. And I did that for one and only reason: to tell the truth of the situation at the given time. And as I recalled before, in 1966, that Jugo Berry, an Eastern Herald editor, Aminur Rashid Chaudhry, said that the comment published in the London Times, not the Weekly Time magazine of America, the London Times had published in 1966 an offensive comment about the Prophet of Islam, which had outraged Muslims across the world. And that was 1966. And there was a demonstration in the Sylhet town, and there was a gathering in the registrar market or registrar field, surrounded by the courts of law in Sylhet town, next to the Keene Bridge, not far from the clock that is still there. So I created a news release based on that demonstration. It wasn't exaggerated, it wasn't anything kind of emotional. 1966, remember. And I and a fellow demonstrator, whose name I shall not mention because he may be upset, but he's in London as far as I know. He has been in London for. And we went to Amborkhana. That was the place where the Jugo Berry was situated. And we took the news release that I had written, and whoever was there at the reception we explained, and they couldn't guarantee that it would be published. So we decided to want to see Aminur Rishi Chaudhuri. Now remember, it is Sylhet. It's not part of kind of metropolitan town in 1966. So people are modestly dressed, men and women. And when we entered his private kind of territory, we found that Aminur Rishi Chaudhuri was wearing half pants with his knees exposed and sitting there like a thug. So he wanted to know why we were there. Now, I don't remember whether I spoke in Siloti or I spoke in English. I would never speak in Bengali. Not there. Most of the times I speak either Siloti or English. So he said, what is it about? And I explained to him, whether I spoke to him in English or in Siloti. Because I mostly speak in Siloti or in English. So I explained to him what the demonstration was about and what was the moral principle. And he said that in Lebanon, which is a Muslim majority place, and the Lebanese Muslim woman is editor of the Financial Times now. He said, if you go to Lebanon, then Muslim children, Muslim sons, are putting their own mothers on the market, or worse to that effect. He said something very insulting about Muslim women being kind of put on the market or being prostituted and pimped by their own son or sons. So I said to him, Aminur Rishi Chaudhuri, that this is not Lebanon. We are not asking for anything extraordinary. All we are asking for is that there was a demonstration, peaceful demonstration, lawful demonstration, articulate and very active demonstration held in Silot. We are asking you to publish that news. Now, anyone watching this program and hearing me say from time to time that this is the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street can get this insight that I've been doing it for decades. And this was a very central example of my dealing with the media, because the media role in brainwashing the ordinary people in any country is very significant, very important, very defining. And I cottoned on to that. I got hold of that fact very early on. So when I was having this kind of miniature debate with Aminur Rishi Chaudhuri, I was standing, my colleague was standing, and Rashid Chaudhuri sat in his chair or whatever. And he said that he was not impressed with the demand. So I said to him that if the news item didn't appear properly, words to the effect, I said to him, that there would be no justification for him having the Jugaberi in circulation after that time. That is the date, the next date, due date of the publication, because Jugaberi was a weekly publication in 1966. And my colleague, so we left, and my colleague said to me that he was surprised that I spoke to Aminur Rishi Chaudhuri the way I did. And most importantly, he said that he, my colleague that went to see Aminur Rishi Chaudhuri, the Jugaberi, he said he didn't think that the Jugaberi would run that story. Okay. So we couldn't prove that because it was still a week away. So I told my colleague, words to the effect in 1966 that, okay, let's see what happens. But there will be serious consequences if he didn't run the story. Now, did he not run the story? Did he run the story in the Juguberry? If you go to the archives of the Juguberry and you go through the year 1966, you will find that demonstration splashed on the front page of the Juguberry. Now, anyone who knows the history of the Juguberry and the history of Aminur Rashid Chaudhry and his family, Aminur Rashid Chaudhry's family was kind of like involved in government, and one of his brothers became the foreign secretary of Bangladesh and was an ambassador, etc. Very similar to, not exactly similar to my own family, but there are details that are different. Now, my colleague had no idea, as far as that time is concerned or was concerned, as to my background. And I don't refer to my relations who are civil servants or even to Arman Ali Chaudhry, who was a senior teacher in the government school in Sylhet. I was thinking of, and I still think of, my great-grandfather, the philanthropist, the educationalist, and the spiritual leader, Bed Shah. It is from Bed Shah that I get the inspiration, and I get the direction, and I get the clarity, the morality, the ethics, and the transparency. And that is what I was doing, although I wasn't mentioning any of that, when I confronted Aminur Rashid Chaudhry and told him in clear terms that he would be best advised to run the story, no matter what he thought about the Muslims in other countries, especially in the Lebanon. Now, another teacher, a few years between those two incidents, at the University of Dhaka in Dhaka, another teacher had been in contact with a student in the University of Dhaka. And that teacher had been appointed just a few years before I would have been. If I took the Pakistan Civil Service or the Pakistan Foreign Service, I would have been an ambassador in due course, etc., etc. That is what this particular one was doing. He was an ambassador. He was the ambassador of Pakistan or he was an envoy, let's say, in case I have got two people confused there. He was an envoy, he was a diplomat. He was a diplomat in the Pakistan at that time in the 70s, sorry, in the 60s. He was a kind of envoy. He was a diplomat posted in the Lebanon, in Beirut. And one of my acquaintances in Dhaka showed a letter from that diplomat who was a friend of his or a family friend or whatever. And he said, look, Lebanon, if you came to Lebanon, it's nothing like our country. He said it's really morally very loose and it doesn't behave like most of the people in the Lebanon don't behave with the moral restrictions and the moral kind of codes that the Muslims in Dhaka or in East Pakistan or Pakistan kind of do. So Aminur Rashid Chaudhry was not the only one. Other people have said things that are very similar morally about the behavior and the code in the, quote, Muslim populated Lebanon. Not 100% Muslim populated, but majority Muslim populated Lebanon. So, when he published that piece, that was a one-off because Juguberry had been published for some time before that, and I had been writing, as I say, without any payment. I had been writing both in the Eastern Herald and the Juguberry solely on the principle that I chose the stories to report, and I unearthed many socially relevant original stories from around the area, my area. So I was not a stranger to the Jugaberi kind of environment. Not that I was in any post in the Jugaberi, but I was known to the editor who was a Brahmin. And I had run-ins with the editor because of the kind of failure or the suppression of the stories that I had brought in. And the other thing is that in the 1960s, early 1960s, which is when I started publishing in the Jugaberi and the Eastern Herald, there was no kind of custom of putting bylines. That is to say, name of the writer, reporter, commentator. But the Jugaberi was one of the most well-known weeklies of the subcontinent in terms of non-English language papers. But again, the Eastern Herald was the English language one because it was catering for the English speaking or English readership. Remember, 1966 was not far away from 1940s. So the history of the Jugaberi was not as a kind of recognizer of the movements against the British colonial rule, in the sense that there was a referendum that had been held in the late 1940s, just before the 1947 August kind of departure of the British. And the referendum was held to decide the future of Ceylon. And Ceylon is bifurcated, divided now, because the major part, let's say, is in Bangladesh, but not a small part. It's a significant part remains in the Indian states. On the other side of the, let's say, if you go to the border at Jakiganj, Jakiganj is the Bangladesh side, and Karimganj is the Indian side of Ceylon, let's say, divided by the river Kushiara, which is on whose banks I was born. Kuyara is the name of the river that we call it. And so the Jugaberi's kind of campaigning history was not based on the political democracy that mobilized the people around the referendum. It was continuing in a haphazard ideological kind of way. And I can extrapolate that description and analysis to apply to the majority of the publications that are still appearing in India. Because in Bangladesh, there is no particular title that is continuing as a continuation of the post 1947 title. There was no publication in Dhaka in the English language that actually was being published during the period up to 1947. But in India, there are literally dozens and dozens of titles that were publishing in English during the period up to August 1947. One of them is, although it is called the Hindu, it is not a Hindu fanatic newspaper. So it's one of the newspapers of record, let's say. Not 100% record, but it is a newspaper of record. So there is the Hindu and there is the Times of India. These are the two main papers that were publishing during the period up to August 1947, and they're still going. Now, the role of the papers, including the role of the cinema, South cinema and the Bollywood and as we have been starting to review the role of the newspapers, the media, and the role of the cinema since August 1947 is under investigation by us, exclusive investigation by our campaign. And in that investigation, we are, of course, including the titles like the Jugoberry, because the Jugoberry was in existence prior to 1966. So we shall go and look at the actual roots of the Jugoberry, and we shall see just how much the Jugoberry failed to represent the people's democratic aspirations post-independence from the British. And the same thing goes to the Hindu, the Times of India, and others. Now, there was a man called R.K. Karanjia. Now, R.K. Karanjia was a fire worshipping, he was a member of the fire worshipping religion. And he came from Persia, that is Iran. But he settled in India. And by the time he became kind of adult, he became a journalist, and he spent most of his life afterwards with the Blitz, with the weekly title called Blitz. And R.K. Karanjia was a fanatical kind of supporter of the likes of Indira Gandhi. And R.K. Karanjia supported Indira Gandhi throughout her entire corrupt years in power. The reason why the BJP and the Shiv Sena and the Rashtriya Sham Shabak Sangha are in power as a coalition in India today is not because they are this RSS, the Shiv Sena, and others are inherently kind of attractive to the ordinary people in India. The many in India, let's say, to coin a phrase. The reason why the BJP is in power in India and has been in power for as long as it has been is the failure of the Jawaharlal Nehru fronted version of the Indian National Congress. And when Nehru left politics and then he died, his daughter was his political kind of replacement. And Indira Gandhi personally was a very kind of incompetent individual in terms of democracy. How? Because her younger son dominated, took over her personality, her politics. And he destroyed her completely politically. Now, these people completely forgot the struggle against the imperial colonial period, struggle like the struggle against the things like the Jallianwala Bagh or Amritsar massacre ordered by the British military leader Daya in the Punjab. So when India became India, what is now India, Pakistan, both before 1971 and since 1971, there are two states. One is Pakistan and one is India. Bangladesh is the new name. But these people who inherited the power or the positions of power under the Congress completely misused the struggle against colonialism. And so completely corrupt were they that there was only one way, that the course would move, the course of the politics of India would move to what is now happening in India with the BJP, with Modi and whatever. So anyone who thinks that we are unfair when we criticize Modi as a fascist, as a liar, etc., must understand that we are equally committed to holding the Congress party and its leaders to account. We have no affiliation with any of our parties in Pakistan, in India, or in Bangladesh. We are internationally motivated for the liberation of these societies to serve the majority of the people in those countries, in every sphere, and by every method and every platform. So, where did we come from when we started on this one? We came from Fleet Street, and we are talking about this fanatic now, whom we call Pierce Moron. Because Pierce Moron today has begun in The Sun, his new column given to him by Rupert Murdoch. And he is being, as they say, half clever or clever by half. Because this particular launching one is a fake attack on Boris Johnson. Whereas the actual agenda of Pierce Moron is to serve the career and the career needs of Boris Johnson and his cabal. Now, there is this timing there on the banner there 23:10 hours. This is wrong. Unless, of course, I can check that and I can see what the actual time is. It's not 23:10 now, is it? It's the time is well into the next day, isn't it? Let's check with the what day is it? It must be Tuesday. It must be Tuesday by now. I'm looking for the clock. Yes, it's 0032 GMT. So it's Tuesday, the 11th of January, 2022. So this broadcast started. What time did we start? This one started at 23:10. So just over an hour, 20 minutes or so, since we have come on air or come on live. So the principle of journalism that I established in my treatment of the role of the Divisional Commissioner of Chittagong in 1970, or as I quote, persuaded Aminur Rishi Chaudhary in 1966 to run that report about the demonstration against a piece written by Auberon Waugh in the London Times, not the American Weekly, the Time magazine, because almost 90% of the people that I know, or even higher number of people in the kind of informed Muslim part of the population, confuse these titles. They don't know the difference between the Time magazine and the Times newspaper. And this extrapolates into many, many other titles and events. So these people who demonstrated against Auberon Waugh in the registrar market field in Silot in 1966 were peaceful, reasonable, logical, and they were leading the moral campaign against the immoral attack crusader mentality attack on Muslims by Auberon in London. Now, of course, when it comes to examining the role of Auberon against the midget Ian Pissoff, we have shown Auberon to be correct on the evidence. That is true. We are just acknowledging that. That doesn't mean we are a fan of Auberon because many of his writings and many of his opinions were abysmal and wrong and offensive and not part of entertainment in the enlightened sense. But the essential quality of journalistic inquiry that is missing from Fleet Street is the kind of journalism that I believe in and I practice. Tell the truth. There is no newspaper, there is no news magazine anywhere that has been doing what I have been doing, let's say. So that's part of the reason why I call it the world exclusive diagnosis of the Fleet Street papers, but by implication of the others. So going back to R.K. Karanjia was so overhyped by most of his contemporaries that they elevated Karanjia to what in the Hindu society would be called a god. And Karanjia himself, from being a person born and brought up in the Farsi, fire worshipping background, originated in Persia, in today's Iran, let's say, he converted himself into the Hindu Brahmin religion. Very rare thing, but he did. And I think that he did that in order to appease people like Indira Gandhi and others. This is what I call the Argentinian effect, because there was a Syrian origin politician in Argentina who became president and prime minister, whatever. And in order to impress the main group, whatever the religion was in Argentina, whether it was Catholicism or whatever, this one originally from Syria staged a stunt. And he staged a stunt by converting himself into the non-Muslim religion. Almost like the one that did the bomb in Liverpool not long ago and was reportedly converted into Christianity. Now, as the time passes since his death, they are revealing various bits and pieces about him, saying that although he converted to Christianity, he actually retained his copy of the Quran, etc., etc. Now, when people do that, when they kind of stage a conversion for purposes other than religious purpose, they're of course lying. And the one in Argentina, as a political observer, he impressed me with the length of his degeneration. So when he became a Christian, that idiot also lost a lot more credibility, and he never overcame his reputation as a liar and a fraudster, etc., etc. Nor did this bomber. Although he's not around because he died in the explosion that he created, he did a series of wrong things about religion. because he apparently converted to Christianity in order to get a kind of favorable impression on the people making decisions as to whether to grant him an asylum or not. Now, that also shows that asylum and refuge are being abused by the so-called host country. And there is no investigation, absolutely no investigation, no real report about the extent to which proselytization, Christian missionary work, is currently being done among the refugee seekers about the currently. So how many people, there is no count in the papers because they don't want to admit this as happening. So there is no number of people known as to how many people seeking asylum, being refused asylum, are doing what this Boma in Liverpool did. Stage being a Christian, changing away from their own religion. Most of the asylum seekers who change into Christianity of one form or another would have been doing that away from their own faith, which is Islam. I mean, the other people like the Sikhs and Buddhists would be very small in number, if any, that would want to convert to Christianity or any other Western kind of faith. So the shortcoming and the limitation of the Jogaveri, because Amina Rashid Chaudhry was saying that because the Muslims in Lebanon were morally very kind of loose, to put it mildly, there was no reason to uphold the the central principles of Islam, let alone to oppose somebody like Aubrey War making offensive remarks about the Prophet. So if you look at the Indian newspapers that have been left behind by the British, like the Hindu, like the Times of India, and some other outlets, and in the kind of contemporary period when they're supposedly independent newspapers, but actually extensions of the BJP in India, then you see that there is no representation in their contents, in their role, in the narrative, in their agendas of the spirit of independence that was fought up to in the case of India, up to 15th of August 1947 against the British Empire. And if you look at the Pakistan newspapers, the only name that is there from the 1940s, which was actually from Bombay, is Dawn. But the Dawn newspaper, over the last 70 years, 1947 to 2022, is just 1 year short of the 7 decades. What the Dawn newspaper has been doing, the name has been there, but it has been sold and controlled by many people, more than one individual. The Dawn newspaper has become part of the most parasitical kind of newspapers in Pakistan. In terms of the press and in terms of the rigor that should be there in the papers, there is not one title in any of these three countries that has got one single newspaper in any language whatsoever, that is worth even picking up. It is that grotesque, it is that corrupt, it is that subordinate, it is that servile, it is that immoral, and it is that kind of degenerate. The result is that, like the films in South India, that is our India Cinema South, most of the newspapers' editorial lines are appeasing the wrong regime and betraying the many in the particular country, in the particular province, in the particular region. For example, in the case of the Indian military massacring ordinary people in Nagaland that were returning home from work, there is no outcry in India about the massacre of the Nagaland people. And so, this fire in Cox's Bazar, in the refugee camp given to the Rohingya people, the fire that raged mainly yesterday, this fire is not making the headlines in the Fleet Street papers. It's not one person that died. Many more people have died there than the number of people that died in the fire about the same time that happened in New York, in the USA. So that's the suppression of the news about massacre of people by fire. It is absolutely certain that the fire in Cox's Bazar was an arson, deliberately set up. That fire must have been part of an agenda to target the Rohingya refugees and to destabilize them and to make them afraid for their lives and their future and their safety. So when we say that the world diagnosis of Fleet Street, that is how it should be. That is, the coverage should be universal. That the deaths, the massacres of the people in Cox's Bazar must be treated by Fleet Street as warranting the same kind of space, same kind of prominence, and the same kind of stated grief and concern. But that's not the case, but that should be the case. And in the case of the Indian paper that reported the death in freezing condition of 22 Pakistanis, including probably 7 or 10 children, in a blizzard condition in part of Pakistan, that report should be multiplied, and every aspect of Pakistani life should be fully reported in the Indian papers, and vice versa. But as I said, the Dawn newspaper, which was the flag carrier for the leadership of the Muslim League, that was the counter party to the Indian National Congress, the Indian Muslim League or Congress, whatever. The Muslim owned newspapers everywhere in India, and in India it is a minority kind of straitjacket in which all the activities politically of the Muslims are kind of kept in prison, ideational prison, ideological prison. In the case of Pakistan, there is no evidence whatsoever that apart from the military side of the Pakistani state, the civilian side of the Pakistani state and the population is getting anywhere near the space or the prominence or the assertions or the assertiveness politically in the country, which is a very serious denial of the claims that are made about the state of Pakistan. Why is it that the Pakistan papers, the Pakistan media, are nowhere near being rigorous, questioning, challenging, investigative that there should be because of the circumstances of the country, the experience of the country, and the needs of the country, the needs of the people at every level? Why? What is stopping them? And in Bangladesh, as I said before, the media is dead, politically dead, which is why anyone who asks me, why don't you go to Bangladesh now? How dare you? How would I go to Bangladesh where I would have to condemn every single aspect of the media, every single aspect of the government, every single aspect of the politicals? What kind of visit would that be? I left the country precisely because there was no environment suitable for objective international standard of investigation, accountability, democracy, and so on. That's why I left. So if I go there, nothing has changed. Things have even worsened because all the pretenses for opposition that were kind of on the surface at the time I left 50 years ago, calendar years ago, 50 calendar years ago, they got worse. Tell me the name of a newspaper in Bangladesh that is leading the campaign for democracy, accountability. You can't tell me that. There isn't one. Tell me the name of the politician who is actually representative of the aspirations, the needs of the vast majority of the people in the country. Can you tell me? No, you can't. And you want me to go there and say the same things there. What would be the difference? There would be no difference because there would be nobody who would come forward to join in the campaign and support anything that must be done to establish democracy, accountability, fairness and justice and equal access and all the rest of it. Nobody would come. Well, Aminur Rashid Chaudhry is not there, but when he was around in 1966, it was another environment. And despite the fact that I disagreed with him and he disagreed with me, he did publish the item about the demonstration. That kind of circumstances do not exist in Bangladesh. And most of the observers, international observers, have given up on Bangladesh. They don't seem bothered about whether there is democracy, whether there is justice. There is no democracy, there is no justice in Bangladesh. So looking at the main kind of news networks, and the news platforms, you can't find anything that actually is reporting from Bangladesh or about Bangladesh. And that is almost the sum total of what the so-called Bangladeshi community-linked outlets are doing in the UK, in the USA, in any significant part in the Middle East, the so-called overseas Bangladeshis that are settled in those countries, those parts of the world. The Bangladesh is a name, but to define Bangladesh in terms of its social, ethical, moral identity, where do you actually focus on? What do you focus on? What does Bangladesh contribute? And what is independence? And whose independence are the varieties of gangs that occupy power in Bangladesh? Whose independence are they serving? Whose independence are they delivering? The question, the paramount question about Bangladesh is based on the claim by the supporters of corruption who condemn any critic of the corrupt regime or regimes as being actually motivated by a denial of Bangladesh's independence. Now, that is not factually true. Every independent country, every independent society must be judged by the here and now. That is to say, what are the particular needs of the people from the state? And how many or what proportion of the population in the country is obstructed from equality, equal treatment in seeking access to treatment, fair treatment, equal treatment. And who is asking this question? And who is denying this question? And who is making up excuses to suppress this question? And how many millions of people in Bangladesh are being denied their human rights every day because there are too many apologies for the denial of the promises of freedom, equal treatment, accountability, fairness, and the right to speak against injustice, against immorality, against criminality by the ones who have the power to make the decisions affecting the many. So, what we have got in this particular edition is a series of references about the kind of media that do business in the subcontinent but don't do service in the subcontinent since 1947. In the context of the cinema South, which we have been examining, there are tokenistic references in some of the films that were made before the BJP came into power. References to Subhash Bose, M.K. Gandhi, and even the Nehru family. That's it. They make mention. They mention these names, but they don't go into the ethics, the morality, the delivery. And the reason why they don't do that is because the countries, well, let's say Bangladesh. I mean, Bangladesh hasn't produced one significant historic kind of monument, kind of in terms of investigative journalism, campaigning journalism. There is nothing, not one instance of campaigning journalism coming out of Bangladesh at any point from January 1972, which is just 2 weeks after the formal ending of the Pakistan regime and the emergence of Bangladesh as a state, with the recognition broadcast and published by Indira Gandhi, the first country recognizing Bangladesh as a state. So it's 50 calendar years. And what have they served? All the people who took positions as power, all the people who took positions as power in the state of Bangladesh have owed the fruits of the freedom and the services promised in the freedom struggle. Who is holding the regime to account according to that list of promises? Who? Nobody. So when the kind of mini debate between me and Aminur Rashid Chaudhuri took place in 1966, let's see if we can find anything from 1966 there. Not about that particular demonstration, obviously, because what I'm looking for is Auburn War. And this is the amazing thing about the Wikipedia. There is no mention. There is no mention by Wikipedia So there is no mention in the Wikipedia that refers to his attack on the Prophet. This is just a typical example of the kind of crusader narrative and agenda of the Wikipedia itself. They expunge, they leave out the whole of the population, the ordinary population of the Muslims. They only include the worst possible entries. The Muslims are not treated in the same way as other people are treated by the Wikipedia. And there is no outrage in the West, in Fleet Street, about the latest hate campaign being done by computerized models aimed at maligning and carrying out degenerate distortions about the characters of the Muslim woman in India. If there were anything remotely comparable in terms of volume and circulation against another kind of faith group, a faith group, let's say, that is familiar with the Fleet Street papers and the media, or a faith that the Fleet Street media recognizes in a wholesome way, as contrasted with the policy of not recognizing the faith group like Islam. Then this computer program that is going around, doing the rounds in India against Muslim women in particular, would have featured on front pages of the Fleet Street newspapers. But it is not. Not even in the Guardian, not even in the Observer. So, for example, when Piers Morgan targets Meghan Markle, because Meghan Markle and her husband Harry Windsor had the audacity to appear on an American talk show hosted by Oprah Winfrey. They do that is Piers Morgan does the attacking on Meghan Markle and Harry Windsor on the flimsiest, weakest of grounds. So we'll come to the kind of unprecedented over promotion of Kate Middleton. And we shall do that in the context of Fleet Street immorality and criminality. Because the promotion of Kate Middleton, wife of Williams, that is the wife of Diana's elder son, William, is happening at a time when the real facts about the alleged rape committed by Andrew Windsor are getting higher and higher, bigger and bigger in details with newer and newer witnesses coming forward saying that, contrary to what Andrew Windsor has been saying, that he never met Virginia Roberts, let alone rape her, let alone be intimate with her sexually. Many witnesses are coming forward about various aspects of his meeting with Virginia Roberts. Now, we shall be talking about the increasingly common kind of reports that businesses, far from sinking, businesses are doing well. But here is a piece about the London law firms in the Financial Times on page 11 that is saying the London law firms chase scare talent. Remember, it's the law. And remember, it's the boast by David Neuberger, who was promoting this claim that with Brexit done, London would become very successful legal center for the world's emerging crisis litigants to come to London and seek resolution. Now, this item is about higher demand for legal help and problems with illness add to shortages. Now, let's see this in context. So, legal correspondent called Kate Bayoli. London-based law firms are struggling to fill job vacancies. A soaring demand for legal services and rising numbers of lawyers leaving their posts have resulted in a shortage of staff. UK law firms advertise more than 2,300 jobs for London-based associates, lawyers below partner level, between January and November last year, in a record hiring spree. According to data from BCL Legal, a recruiter, and Vacancy Soft, a labor market analytics group, the number represented an increase of 131% on 2020 and 37% rise on 2019 numbers. But Matthew Porter, a director of BCL, said firms were struggling to fill the vacancies because they are competing for the same people. There is a huge shortage of talent right now. According to BCL and Vacancy Soft, the number of fixed-term contract vacancies advertised by law firms in London rose to 183 last year, from 81 in 2020. So these are all quotations from various people. And it doesn't. The point I'm making in this kind of part of the discussion is that this is corrupt. The law firms are being reported here strictly as business. And they're not saying, absolutely not saying anything about the reason for the shortage and reason for the rise in numbers of people seeking legal advice during this pandemic. Why has there been this rise in the numbers of people seeking, needing legal advice? And the answer is not in that Financial Times piece. The answer is here. Answer is that too many legal rights are being violated. Not that the legal rights are the prime areas of championship by the lawyers. But the reason why there is a rise in the people needing to seek advice of a quote lawyer is because there are rising numbers of violations and denials of people's rights. The Financial Times claims to be the sane one in the Fleet Street pile, but it is as insane, as racist, as ignorant, and as corrupt as the rest of them. The Financial Times is distinguished from, let's say, the Scum and the Daily Mail and the Beaverbrook Express. The style is different, but the morality is the same. That lack of morality is the same. Because there is no reference in that piece to human rights, lack of human rights, lack of asylum provision, lack of recognition of the rights of the refugees, no reference to racism. Now, here is the piece that echoes what we have said before. The NHS was left ill prepared for COVID. That's written by somebody called Matthew Tyler, who is described as the chief executive of the NHS Confederation. We shall come back to that in a minute. And here is a piece by a Hindu person, Parag Khanna, which is headed, Britain needs immigrants if it is to survive the climate storm. And it is a corruptly written piece because it ends the last paragraph. Boris is right. Great powers will inevitably be green powers. But being green is not enough. Collecting people is collecting power too. So it's times are being kind of more on future map. And he's sucking up to Rishi Sunak as well. And what I'm saying there is that the collection of articles in the Financial Times are representative of the corruption of Fleet Street. The only difference is in a style, in some kind of pretentious kind of introduction, pretentious references. The Financial Times is absent from the area of holding people to account, holding the key decision makers to account, holding the government to account, holding the Brexiteers to account, holding the members of parliament to account, holding the corrupt councils to account. And we shall be talking more about Geoffrey Monks later, not necessarily in this edition, because we are bringing to an end this particular edition, which I think has passed just 2 hours. And we shall be continuing in the next edition or editions.